I'm in a unique position. Remember, I was chief of staff for the Department of Defense on January 6th. We were responsible for the deployment of the National Guard. And what I was forced to testify to years ago at great personal cost has now once again, just like Russiagate, been proven true, because all I do is speak the truth. On January, actually in the days before January 6th, we were in the Oval Office where the President Trump at the time, authorized, pursuant to law, up to 10 to 20,000 National Guard. We took that authorization because the law's second part required a request from who? Nancy Pelosi and the Metropolitan Police and the mayor at the time. And what did they say? No. And remember what happened for the next 2 years? They say, oh, Kash is lying, Trump's lying. And what did we find? Letters of their declination of the National Guard, refusing to have the National Guard show up. So all I can speak to is the facts, and the facts are those plus this. Nancy Pelosi and her team were busy filming a movie on January 6th while this so-called chaos around her was going down.
Okay, so imagine you're Kash Patel, Trump's FBI director. You've been firing agents left and right, people who worked on January 6th investigations, people who were involved in cases related to Trump. You probably thought you were safe, protected by presidential authority and your position, and then you end up in federal court facing Judge James Boasberg, the same judge who's been hammering Trump administration officials in other cases. And the judge doesn't just question your decisions, he threatens you with jail, not as some distant theoretical possibility, but as an immediate consequence if you continue obstructing court orders, demanding transparency about why you fired these agents, and under questioning, you start to crumble. You can't produce credible explanations. You refuse to provide documents to court order, and your legal defense basically falls apart in real time as the judge grows increasingly frustrated with your evasiveness. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
During that time on January 6th, I was serving as chief of staff at the Department of Defense. And days prior, we had received the authorization from the president to issue the National Guard to protect you and your colleagues. But as you know, the law requires a request before the deployment of that guard. That request did not come in until the afternoon of January 6th. Once that request came in, this, unfortunately, as has been confirmed by his own testimony, I believe, the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, failed to immediately deploy the National Guard and instead took a break to speak to media and make personal phone calls. That endangered the safety of you and your colleagues. And if you look at the Biden Inspector General report, we at the Department of Defense authorized the fastest cold start of the National Guard since World War II and the largest occupation since the American Civil War. And the Biden Justice Department said that we, including myself as chief of staff when it came to the deployment and employment of the National Guard, acted swiftly and without undue delay.
This happened in a federal court hearing in 2025, and it represents one of the most dramatic confrontations yet between the Trump administration and the judiciary. Because Kash Patel isn't just any official, he's FBI director, one of the most powerful law enforcement positions in the country, and he's being threatened with jail by a federal judge for what amounts to politicizing the FBI, firing agents for working on Trump-related cases, and then obstructing judicial inquiry into those firings. That's extraordinary. That's the kind of thing that in normal times would trigger a constitutional crisis. But these aren't normal times, and this is just the latest example of courts pushing back hard against Trump administration officials who think they're above the law. The lawsuit that led to this hearing was filed by fired FBI officials who claim Patel illegally terminated them because they worked on cases Trump didn't like. These aren't low-level employees. These are experienced agents, veterans of counterterrorism work, crime reduction efforts, serious national security operations. And according to the lawsuit, Patel told staffers that he had to fire these agents because his own job depended on it. That keeping his position as FBI director required removing agents involved in cases related to Trump. That's an admission that firings were politically motivated rather than based on performance or legitimate organizational reasons. And if that's true, it's illegal. Federal employees have protections against political retaliation. You can't fire career FBI agents just because the president doesn't like investigations they worked on. Judge Boasberg, who's been presiding over multiple cases involving Trump administration actions, apparently has had enough. According to reports from the hearing, he was visibly frustrated with Patel's responses to questions. Patel couldn't or wouldn't explain why specific agents were fired. He claimed not to have relevant documents that the court had ordered him to produce. He gave evasive answers about conversations with White House officials about the firings, and the judge made clear that continued obstruction would result in contempt charges and possible jail time, not fines or sanctions. Jail. That's how serious the judge views Patel's conduct. The context matters here. The agents who were fired had worked on various Trump-related investigations, January 6 cases, classified documents cases, election interference investigations. These are sensitive, important cases that go to the heart of presidential accountability. And Patel, acting as Trump's FBI director, systematically removed agents who've been involved in those cases. The message that sends is chilling. It tells FBI agents that investigating the president or his allies is a career-ending move. That if you do your job professionally and pursue cases based on evidence, you'll be fired if those cases implicate people Trump wants to protect. That's exactly how you destroy an independent FBI and turn it into a political tool. Patel's confirmation hearing earlier in the year should have been a warning sign. Senators from both parties raised concerns about his loyalty to Trump over institutional responsibilities. They questioned whether he'd protect FBI independence or turn the Bureau into Trump's personal investigative force. Patel gave reassuring answers during confirmation, promising to uphold the law and protect agent independence. But his actions as FBI director have been exactly what critics feared: mass firings of agents who worked Trump-related cases, pressure on career professionals to close investigations or shift focus away from Trump allies, in apparent coordination with the White House on matters that should be insulated from political influence. The bipartisan Senate backlash that's emerged is significant. Even some Republicans who supported Patel's confirmation are now expressing concern about how he's conducting himself. When whistleblowers come forward with allegations of political retaliation, when career agents file lawsuits claiming illegal firings, when federal judges threaten jail time for obstruction, that's hard to ignore or defend. Republicans who care about FBI independence and rule of law are uncomfortable with what they're seeing, even if they're not willing to break with Trump publicly. The national security implications are enormous. The FBI doesn't just investigate political crimes. It's responsible for counterterrorism, counterintelligence, organized crime, cyber threats. When you fire experienced agents for political reasons, you weaken the Bureau's capacity to handle those critical national security missions. You lose institutional knowledge, you demoralize the workforce, and you make it harder to recruit and retain talented people who don't want to work in a politicized environment where doing your job well could get you fired. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly what happened in that courtroom, what the fired agents are alleging, why Patel's own words about firing agents to keep his job are so damning, and what this means for FBI independence and the rule of law. This is about whether law enforcement can function as an independent check on presidential power, or whether it becomes just another political weapon. And Judge Boasberg's jail threat suggests at least one federal judge believes the situation has reached crisis levels. All right, let's dig into the specifics of what these fired FBI agents are alleging, because their claims are damning and detailed. The lawsuit was filed by multiple former agents who worked on various high-profile investigations. According to their complaint, they were performing their jobs professionally, following evidence, conducting investigations according to FBI protocols and guidelines. But they were abruptly fired after Kash Patel became FBI director. No adequate explanation, no performance issues documented, just suddenly terminated. And the common thread among the fired agents is that they'd all worked on cases related to Trump or his administration. Some had worked on January 6 investigations, tracking down participants in the Capitol attack and building cases against them. Others had been involved in the classified documents case, investigating Trump's retention of national defense information at Mar-a-Lago. Still others had worked on election interference matters or other investigations touching on Trump and his allies. The pattern is clear. If you worked on cases Trump didn't like, Patel fired you. That's political retaliation, and it's illegal under federal employment law. But what makes the lawsuit particularly explosive is the allegation about what Patel told staffers. According to the complaint, Patel said he had to fire these agents because his ability to keep his own job depended on removing agents involved in cases related to the president. Think about what that means. Patel is essentially admitting that White House, presumably Trump himself or senior Trump officials, told him to fire these agents as a condition of Patel keeping his FBI director position. That's political pressure from the top. That's the president using personnel decisions to obstruct investigations into himself and his allies. And Patel apparently complied, firing career professionals to protect his own job. If Patel actually said this, and the lawsuit claims there are witnesses who heard him, it's devastating. It's an admission that the firings were political rather than merit-based. It proves that FBI personnel decisions were being driven by White House political considerations rather than by FBI leadership based on performance and organizational needs. and it shows that Patel prioritized keeping his job over protecting FBI independence and the agents under his authority. That's the opposite of what FBI directors are supposed to do. Judge Boasberg's hearing focused on getting Patel to explain himself and produce documents. The judge had ordered Patel to provide records related to the firing decisions, communications with the White House, performance evaluations of the fired agents, documentation of the decision-making process. But according to reports from the hearing, Patel didn't fully comply. He claimed some documents were privileged or didn't exist. He gave vague answers about why he couldn't produce materials the court ordered, and the judge was not having it. Boasberg apparently pressed Patel on specific cases. Why was this particular agent fired? What performance issues justified termination? What process was followed? And Patel struggled to provide coherent answers. He couldn't point to documented performance problems. He couldn't explain why agents with good records were suddenly terminated. He fell back on vague claims about reorganization and efficiency, but those explanations didn't stand up to scrutiny when the judge pointed out that the fired agents were experienced professionals working on important cases. The judge's threat of jail time was specific and immediate. According to witnesses in the courtroom, Boasberg said that if Patel continued to defy court orders to produce documents and provide truthful testimony, he would be held in criminal contempt, and criminal contempt can result in jail time. The judge wasn't making an abstract threat about what might happen eventually. He was saying, comply with my orders now, or you'll be held in contempt and potentially jailed. That's extraordinary pressure to put on an FBI director, but it shows how seriously the judge views Patel's obstruction. The broader context of FBI politicization makes this case even more significant. Under Patel's leadership, the FBI has allegedly shifted focus away from Trump-related cases and toward investigations of Trump's enemies. Career agents report pressure to close cases involving Trump allies, while opening or expanding cases involving Democrats or Trump critics. Whistleblowers have come forward alleging that investigations are being manipulated for political purposes, and the mass firings of agents who work Trump cases fit into that pattern of politicization. The national security community is watching this case closely because it affects FBI credibility and effectiveness. The FBI relies on being seen as apolitical and professional. When investigations appear politically motivated, foreign intelligence services and domestic partners lose trust. Witnesses become less willing to cooperate, juries become more skeptical, and recruiting talented people becomes harder because the best candidates don't want to work for an institution that's been politicized. The damage Patel is doing to FBI reputation will take years to repair, even after he's gone. The comparison to historical FBI moments is stark. The FBI has faced credibility crises before, most notably during J. Edgar Hoover's tenure, when the Bureau was used for political purposes and to target civil rights leaders and dissidents. After Hoover, reforms were implemented to protect FBI independence and prevent political abuse. Those reforms included restrictions on communications between the White House and FBI about ongoing investigations, procedures to insulate personnel decisions from political pressure, and whistleblower protections for agents who report misconduct. Patel appears to have systematically violated those reforms, returning the FBI to a model where it serves the president personally rather than serving the law. Congressional oversight has been inadequate. Some senators raised concerns during Patel's confirmation, but he was confirmed anyway. And since confirmation, congressional oversight of FBI under Patel has been limited and mostly partisan. Republicans have defended Patel and attacked his critics. Democrats have held some hearings and demanded information, but without Republican cooperation, they can't compel testimony or documents effectively. The usual checks on FBI director conduct aren't working because of partisan polarization. The whistleblower allegations add another layer to the case. According to reports, multiple FBI employees have come forward through official channels to report political interference and retaliation. These whistleblowers have provided detailed accounts of pressure to manipulate investigations, of firings designed to obstruct cases, of White House involvement in matters that should be insulated from political influence. But instead of these whistleblower complaints triggering investigations and accountability, the whistleblowers themselves have faced retaliation. Some have been fired or reassigned. Others have been investigated for leaking or insubordination. The message is clear: speak out about politicization and you'll be punished. The legal jeopardy Patel faces is serious. Criminal contempt for defying court orders. Potential perjury if he lied under oath during the hearing or in written submissions. Possible obstruction of justice for trying to impede the court's inquiry. And civil liability in the lawsuit brought by fire agents if they can prove their terminations were illegal. Patel probably thought his position as FBI director would protect him from personal consequences. But Judge Boasberg is making clear that protection doesn't extend to defying court orders or obstructing judicial proceedings. The political calculation for Patel is impossible. If he complies with the court and produces documents showing White House involvement in firing decisions, he exposes Trump and probably gets fired himself for disloyalty. If he continues obstructing, he faces jail time and possibly criminal charges. There's no good option. He's caught between protecting Trump and protecting himself. And his visible crumbling during the hearing suggests he's realizing how bad his situation is. The impact on ongoing FBI operations is already significant. Agents are demoralized and afraid. They don't know if doing their jobs professionally will get them fired. They're second-guessing investigative decisions based on political considerations rather than evidence. And they're leaving the Bureau in numbers that create operational gaps. Experienced agents with years of institutional knowledge are deciding the FBI under Patel isn't an institution worth serving. That brain drain will affect FBI effectiveness for years. Okay, let's break this down into core points. Point 1. Kash Patel faces immediate jail threat from Judge Boasberg for obstructing court orders and refusing to explain or document why he fired FBI agents who worked on Trump-related cases. The judge isn't making abstract threats. He's saying comply now or face criminal contempt and jail. That's extraordinary pressure on an FBI director and shows how seriously the court views Patel's conduct. Point 2. Fired FBI agents are suing Patel with allegations that he admitted firing them to keep his own job, responding to White House pressure to remove agents from Trump-related investigations. If true, this is an admission that firings were politically motivated rather than merit-based. That's illegal under federal employment law and shows FBI personnel decisions being driven by presidential political interests rather than by organizational needs or performance. Point 3. Patel crumbled under questioning, unable to provide credible explanations for firings or produce documents the court ordered. His evasive responses and inability to justify his actions damage his credibility and legal position. When the FBI director can't explain why he fired experienced agents and can't provide documentation, it strongly suggests the firings were improper and he's trying to hide the real reasons. And point 4, this case is part of broader FBI politicization under Patel's leadership that's damaging the Bureau's independence, effectiveness, and reputation. Mass firings, investigative manipulation, whistleblower retaliation, all of it adds up to systematic corruption of an institution that's supposed to be apolitical. The long-term damage to FBI capacity and credibility will take years to repair. So why does this matter beyond just Patel's personal legal jeopardy? First reason, it's about FBI independence and whether law enforcement can investigate presidents without political retaliation. The FBI is supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads, even if that means investigating the president or their allies. If FBI directors can fire agents for working on presidential cases, then FBI independence is gone, investigations become politically driven rather than evidence-based, and presidents become effectively immune from law enforcement scrutiny. That's incompatible with rule of law in a democracy. Second reason, it's about whether federal courts can check executive branch abuse through their authority to demand information and hold officials accountable. Judge Boasberg's jail threat is an assertion of judicial power against an executive official who thinks he can defy court orders with impunity. If Patel successfully stonewalls the court without consequences, it establishes that executive officials don't have to comply with judicial orders. That breaks separation of powers and makes courts toothless. But if Boasberg follows through and actually holds Patel in contempt, it establishes that courts can enforce their orders even against powerful executive officials. Third reason, it's about the institutional damage being done to FBI that will affect national security and law enforcement for years. When you fire experienced agents for political reasons, you lose expertise and institutional knowledge. When you demoralize the workforce through political interference, you reduce effectiveness. When you make FBI look like a political tool rather than an independent law enforcement agency, you lose trust from foreign partners, witnesses, and the public. All of that makes America less safe because FBI can't do its job as effectively. Fourth reason, it's about precedent for how future presidents will treat FBI and other law enforcement agencies. If Trump and Patel can politicize FBI without facing serious consequences, future presidents will do the same. Why wouldn't they? If there's no accountability for turning FBI into a political weapon, every president will be tempted to use it for their own purposes. That permanent politicization would fundamentally change American law enforcement and government. Now what comes next? Judge Boasberg will have to decide whether to follow through on his jail threat. If Patel continues obstructing, does the judge actually hold him in contempt and jail him? That would be unprecedented for an FBI director. But if the judge doesn't follow through, it undermines the credibility of judicial orders. The judge is somewhat trapped by his own strong threat. He has to enforce it or lose authority. We'll see in coming weeks or months whether Patel complies or whether the judge makes good on the jail warning. The lawsuit by fired agents will proceed through courts. Discovery will reveal more details about why agents were fired and what role the White House played. Depositions will put Patel and other officials under oath. Documents will be produced that show the decision-making process. All of this will create a public record of FBI politicization that can be used for accountability and reform. Even if the case doesn't result in Patel going to jail, it will expose what happened in ways that political pressure and congressional oversight haven't. Patel might resign or be fired before the legal battles are resolved. If his position becomes untenable, if the pressure from courts and Congress becomes too much, Trump might decide Patel is more trouble than he's worth, or Patel might decide that protecting Trump isn't worth personal legal jeopardy and resign to save himself. Either way, there's a decent chance Patel doesn't finish his tenure as FBI director, given the mounting legal and political problems he faces. Trump will have to decide whether to continue supporting Patel or distance himself. Publicly backing Patel means owning the FBI politicization and firings. Distancing himself means letting Patel take the fall, while Trump claims he didn't know about the details of personnel decisions. Trump typically chooses the latter, letting subordinates face consequences while he denies knowledge or responsibility. Expect Trump to start creating distance from Patel as the legal situation deteriorates. Congress might finally exercise more serious oversight now that courts are involved and the legal jeopardy is clear. Even some Republicans who've defended Patel might get uncomfortable if he's threatened with jail by a federal judge. There might be hearings where fired agents testify publicly about political retaliation. Legislation might be proposed to protect FBI independence and prevent future politicization. Whether any of that passes depends on partisan dynamics, but the pressure for congressional action will increase. FBI agents watching all this will make career decisions based on what happens to Patel and the fired agents. If Patel faces serious consequences, it might reassure agents that there are limits to political interference. If Patel escapes without real accountability, more agents will leave because they'll conclude the Bureau can't be saved from politicization. The outcome of this legal battle will directly affect whether talented people continue serving at FBI or whether the exodus of experienced professionals continues. Here's my take. Patel's conduct as FBI director represents one of the worst cases of law enforcement politicization in modern American history. Firing agents for working on presidential cases, admitting he did it to keep his own job under White House pressure, and then obstructing judicial inquiry into those firings is a combination of abuses that strikes at the heart of FBI independence and rule of law. Judge Boasberg is right to threaten jail time because the alternative is allowing executive officials to defy courts with impunity. The crumbling of Patel's defense during the hearing reveals that he knows his conduct was improper. If the firings were justified, he'd have documented performance issues and clear explanations. If the process was proper, he'd have records to produce showing appropriate decision-making. But he has neither. He's obstructing because transparency would expose that the firings were politically motivated and probably illegal. His evasiveness is an admission of guilt. The broader damage to FBI is the most serious consequence beyond Patel's personal legal jeopardy. The Bureau has lost credibility, expertise, and independence under his leadership. Rebuilding will require new leadership committed to depoliticization, reforms to protect against future interference, and time to restore trust internally and externally. That's a multi-year project that can't begin until Patel is gone and his abuses are publicly acknowledged and corrected. The precedent being set here matters enormously for future FBI independence. If Patel faces serious consequences, it establishes that FBI directors can't politicize the Bureau without risking their careers and potentially their freedom. But if Patel escapes accountability, it establishes that presidents can install loyalists who will fire agents working on presidential cases, and those loyalists won't face meaningful consequences. Which precedent gets established will shape FBI independence for decades. So where does this leave us? Kash Patel faces immediate threat of jail from a federal judge for obstructing inquiry into political firings of FBI agents. His legal defense crumbled under questioning. Fired agents are suing with damaging allegations that Patel admitted firing them under White House pressure. The FBI as an institution is damaged by politicization that will take years to repair, and courts are finally pushing back against executive abuse with threats of criminal consequences for officials who defy judicial authority. This is a critical test of whether American institutions can hold Trump administration officials accountable for abuses of power. Can a federal judge actually jail an FBI director for contempt? Can fired agents successfully sue for illegal political retaliation? Can courts force transparency about political interference in law enforcement? The answers will determine whether rule of law can survive in an era of aggressive executive overreach. And based on Judge Boasberg's jail warning, at least one federal judge is prepared to enforce limits even against the most powerful executive officials. Stay tuned, because this legal battle is just beginning. More revelations will emerge in discovery, more witnesses will testify, more officials might be implicated, and the question of whether Patel actually goes to jail will be answered in coming weeks or months. This is the kind of accountability moment that shapes institutions and precedents for generations. And we're watching it unfold in real time with enormous stakes for FBI independence and rule of law in America.